as much of the mad and macabre as they were to see that day.
Became a nightmare. I'm going to do a walkthrough.
Over 1,300 pieces of evidence were collected from the crime scene.
Scratch marks along the wall.
There was no doubt something paranormal was going on.
And for that exact reason, I'll continue my research to drive away the darkness.
It's November 19th, 2013, and this has been Robison on ASIP Radio. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Tonight I have actually a special guest who's kind of near and dear to my heart. Growing up all my life, I heard many stories of the strange and alluring, and they all essentially came from my father. My father has long been a ufologist and a devout believer in extraterrestrial beings, also ufology. And tonight he's going to sit down with me and talk to me. Of course, he's in a different state over in California, so I have him on the phone with me. So we're trying a new technique out tonight for my podcast. But welcome to the show.
Hey there. Yeah, sounds cool.
Yes. I'm glad you were willing to sign up for this little venture.
Yeah, a chance to talk about my favorite subject, yeah.
Exactly. Can't go wrong there. So why don't you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Okay. Well, born and raised in the Northwest, and the Northwest has had their share of sightings and stuff. I got into the UFOs at a very early age. I was in junior high, I believe it was 7th grade, and I don't know what actually caught my eye. Maybe it was a UFO magazine. They came out in the late 60s, mid-60s, somewhere in there. And I must have saw one and browsed through it, got interested a little bit. And from there, it just started building to the point that in 7th grade science class, I did a report on UFOs. And I did so good on the report that the teacher was kind of helping me behind the scenes a little, giving me tips on what I should do for my report. And I ended up acing the report. But back then, there were 6 basic shapes of UFOs. Nowadays, it's changed quite a bit. Back then, it was like basic spherical or circular, and the typical saucer shape, and football, and cigar shape, and dumbbell shape,
right,
diamond, and all these different ones. Nowadays, it seems it's almost like the craft that are coming here are evolved. They're newer models, I guess you might say. I mean, we're only talking like 50 years or 30 years, 40 years, something like that. But I have a hunch things have changed as far as what they're flying in and what we used to see. Okay. But I mean, what we used to see goes clear back into history, clear back, the very basic startup of humanity on this planet. We've been drawing cave drawings and hieroglyphics all over the planet of about the same thing, showing strange people in strange costumes that look like, nowadays we can recognize it as a uniform of a spacesuit and helmet,
right,
and things they didn't understand at the time, but they tried to draw them.
Right.
And I mean, we're still finding them, to this day.
Now, let me ask you this then. I mean, with regard to I love it because you're touching on, historically from mankind's perspective, what we've documented, or seen and tried to figure out and kind of convey in our ways at those points in times in our evolution. But what specifically made you a believer, like in the aliens or ufology in general?
Well, the subject caught me, and back then, I remember once seeing something in the sky that I thought I was really hoping it was a UFO. It turned out to be a plane, and he was doing something odd. He was not in his normal flight path. He had his landing lights on way outside of PDX there in Portland, and so my dad and I were coming home from a hunting trip late at night, and we're watching this thing, and it looks like it's stationary. What turned out to be is that it was flying directly at us, coming and it took a while to figure it out.
Right.
And ever since then, I mean, the hairs go up in the back of your neck, and my dad didn't spook easily. He was spooked that night, and I mean, to the point where he stopped the car on the side of the road, and we both sat there and watched it, and kind of our mouths hanging open.
I think I even remember Grandpa talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, I remember bringing it up to him before as just more of a jokingly thing. But that kind of planted the seed, and it evolved from that and a lot of the material I was reading. I mean, I read a lot. And, I mean, there was things that happened in Portland area, for example, the airport. Early on, I learned that you need radar to lock onto something to prove that it's really up in the air. And if it's metallic, it'll give you a nice signal. If two radars lock onto it, you've got something, you know, you now have something there. Well, one day out of Portland Airport, the National Guard was scrambled. There was a bogey out over the, it would be the West Hills, but a little bit south of Portland. And, so they scrambled a couple of our planes at the time. And, the commanding officer had the other, pilot stay back a ways and pursued, the object because he realized this was not a normal plane they were chasing. And to prove that it was really something there, it occurred to him that if he locked on his radar or armed his weapons, he could, you know, he'd have proof that there was really something there. So he did. And when he got back to the ground, they handcuffed him and took him away because there's a lot of rules about a warplane over civilian populations. The one thing you don't do is arm your weapon system. And he did. He knew what he was doing. And they took him away, court-martialed him, and he was gone. But the little article made it to the Oregonian, and I remember cutting it out and saving it in my scrapbook. I had a scrapbook of just collection of articles and stuff. And over the years, I lost the scrapbook. I gave it to somebody to read, and I never got it back. So I lost the article. But way back then, things were happening. I mean, the sad thing is things have been happening since before mankind's been on this planet that has to do with extraterrestrials. I mean, we're one race on this planet of about 3 or 4, and there's been 3 or 4 races on this planet all the time. And yet, nobody knows of it, you know?
Well, or at least very few do. Now, did you, I mean...
That's a better way to put it.
Yeah. You know, did you have a specific experience take place in your life that, you know, did you see an alien or did you see a UFO outside of, you know, what you saw with, you know, Grandpa?
No, nothing that I can actually say. I mean, if I saw something, I didn't realize what I was seeing. Well, it took a long time for my belief system to slowly evolve into it. It fascinated me. I was really interested in the subject, but it was probably later into my 20s when it really got solidified, when I volunteered to be a field report taker for the Cosmic Science Research Center out of Portland. Ed Palmer used to run it, and I offered to, you know, if there was any sightings over in the Vancouver area, in the Washington area, across the river there, that I would hunt them down and get a report and bring it back, and we'd research it. You know, one of the things you want to do, even for back then, was call your local airports and ask if you could talk to somebody to confirm a UFO sighting at so-and-so time, at so-and-so date, and see if you can get them to say, oh, well, there was a bogey here, but we don't know what it was, it would be a non-determined type thing. And if you can get multiple airports that locked onto it, that nails it down. Or if you get credible witnesses, officers or politicians or somebody above just a citizen, because that adds credibility to your report. Well, I chased down 3 different reports in about a year. We didn't have a whole lot for me to chase down. But by the time I usually got to the people, their family and friends were so cruel. They had harassed them to the point they wouldn't hardly talk to anybody. I had people hiding from me.
Now, why do you think that? Do you think that was due to just being chastised and
oh yeah,
and not?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now
that's one of the things about this subject that still goes on to this day, is the humiliation of being ridiculed by your peers or your family or whoever. Nobody wants to be made fun of.
Oh, absolutely.
You truly do have a credible sighting, or something's happened that you can't explain, like missing time or something like that. Oh boy, people start.
Well, Well, and you can
go ahead.
Yeah, and even when you have that conversation with people, like in a casual setting, you can start seeing the smirk come over a lot of people's face, and so you find yourself already a little bit in that defense posture because you believe, and they don't, and they just are almost making a mockery of what you're trying to say or convey to them. And so, it just it puts you in a definitely a very awkward scenario and sometimes very uncomfortable. And I'm sure you've had this happen where you've tried to convey some of the things you've come across or learned as you were, when you were young, and probably spoke about it at the workplace. And I'm sure things transpired, chastising, or sorts.
Yeah. I learned quickly who to talk to, who not to. And I had a group of friends that I would go around on Sundays and sit and talk with them for sometimes hours. And then there was times that I would go from 2 and 3 different people's house on Sundays and just sit and talk with them about the subject. And I'd talk so much I'd lose my voice. It was.
Now you were even telling me you were afraid of that happening tonight, and that's why I told you to make sure you have a nice, tall, stiff drink to, soothe your vocal cords. I need you to keep going, man.
Yeah, not a problem.
I know you got it in you.
Well, and along the same lines, try to imagine somebody that's had an abduction, and they're trying to come to terms with it themselves first, because it's, for example, a missing time episode, and aliens that abduct people notoriously know how to play with our psyche, and through a form of hypnosis that's very strong hypnosis, that they can implant images into our mind that replace what you're seeing of them with another image that doesn't make a lot of sense, but is explainable to other people if you should mention it. And it takes sometimes a long period of time to break down those barriers that subconscious implants like that can take years to break down. And a lot of people, like Betty and Barney Hill, way back in the early 70s, I guess, they made a movie about it, Interrupted Journey. And they're driving from one town to the next town, about a 35-minute, 40-minute drive, and to go have dinner with their friends. They don't show up for like 2 hours. And when they show up, they think they've arrived on time and, hey, what's for dinner and stuff. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah. And so it took them almost a year of nightmares, and it took months before they even mentioned to each other what their nightmare subject was about. And then they realized they were having this nightmare. Well, those are those subconscious implants that are blocking them realizing what actually happened.
Right.
So when they...
Yeah, and that's that...
Yeah.
I was going to say that's that, where they lose a portion of time basically in their life because they were taken away to a different dimension. And when they came back, the time still continued while they were gone. And it was of a different, metric, that it was going by.
Yeah, and that could be. In their particular case, I think they were sitting in the middle of the road where they saw the UFO, and they did a medical examination on both of them. One of the aliens talked at length with Betty, but it took probably a year before they finally got in touch with the right people. They went to a doctor. The doctor referred them to a specialist, a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist just happened to know somebody that did regressive hypnosis. And they took them back in time and recreated the abduction scenario. And it was utterly fascinating to this day.
Yeah.
To the point, one of the best parts of the story she had a medical examination that left scars, that they were actually unexplained scars.
Right.
That's the kind of proof you're looking for. But the captain of the ship showed her a star map, and it was on the wall. It was electronic, like a flat panel screen TV type thing. And she looked at it, and she goes, "What's that?" Because she didn't recognize the solar system she was looking at. And he goes, "Well, right here," and he pointed at a planet, and he goes, "This is where I'm from, and this is where you are over here." And she couldn't quite figure out why it looked so skewed and strange to her. Well, once the story came out and people started reading about it, third grade elementary teacher who was a amateur astronomer recreated in her backyard the solar system according to how she drew a sketch. She drew a sketch of what alien told her. And so she took styrofoam balls and stuff and yarn and string and made from a tree to a swing set this web of solar system to suspend the planets out in the open air, basically, was what she was doing per the sketch she was given. And she couldn't figure out where Earth was until one day, this was hanging in her backyard for months. One day she was crawling around on her back trying to locate something that had come loose. She reattached it. When she decided she'd just stand up where she was inside this big maze of strings and styrofoam balls that were representing the different planets, and she painted them and gave Saturn star, the rings and all that stuff.
Right.
She stood up inside of it, kind of turned around, and then she saw where Earth was. And then she realized if she turned around and looked 180 the other direction, found the planet that the guy was referring to. And it finally aligned up for her. And she was the only one to ever decipher Betty's map.
Wow.
I read it in the book.
And that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating because, again, her interaction was with this advanced alien race, and then in turn she was able to reconstruct this constellation map in her backyard out of stuff she had, but intricately, so that way you could literally see the different planets and solar systems.
Yeah.
Well, so I think what we're going to do real quick here is we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk about some of the more bizarre cases you've either studied or maybe even been involved in. So stand by. We'll be right back with ASEP Radio. Welcome back to ASEP Radio. My name is Ben Robison, and tonight's guest is Jim Robison, my father. So we left off kind of giving a little bit of background on you and how you became kind of a believer and some of the, just experiences or stories and things like that helped shape you into, being avidly involved in this field. So now what I wanted to talk about, though, I guess for the sake of, hearing some pretty juicy tales, I want to know more about some of the bizarre cases that you've either studied or maybe had some kind of interaction with.
Okay. Well, the first one that comes to mind, and it's actually hung with me for quite a while, it involved a engineer who was fresh out of college. He was what the different alphabet companies out there that work for the government. They recruit the cream of the crop, you might say. They watch for the high honor students that come out of different engineering classes, and they recruit them and get them in as fast as they can. And he was brought in. He'd done engineering on architecture, and he'd gone into a subset of architecture of underground dwelling construction. So they brought him in because they needed help in those areas. According to him, in his early part of his career, he was a specialist in demolitions, underground buildings, and we're talking bunkers, air raid shelters, stuff like that, only deeper. He said the shallowest one was a quarter mile down. The deepest one that he knew of was 2.5 miles down. He said there was about 170 of them in the United States that had been built to, in the event of a nuclear war or something of that nature, if you had a get out of jail card, if you had a special letter sent to you that allowed you and your family to get into these underground facilities, then you were somebody deemed useful to reconstruct and repopulate the planet.
Why do you think they chose certain people?
Well, these weren't just your average people. They were higher ups in the government, wealthy politicians, but most of them were scientists, engineers, medical, what you would need to keep everybody, to start a new race. I mean, you're going to need a lot of medical help. Okay. You're going to need survivalists, people that know how to get out there and work in possibly a worst case scenario. I mean, you can only stay underground so long. Some of these facilities have nuclear power plants to them that can go for many, many years, and so you've got power, electricity and stuff, but like I said, you can't stay down there forever. They pretty much figured out the hydroponic garden type scenario to where they can feed, and I don't know how you do the protein part of it, though. I mean, what, you're going to have animals underground with you, too, and then you got to feed them? Oh, my God, that just opens up a huge nightmare there. So I don't know how long they're actually able to stay underground, but he was involved in a lot of those, probably 25% of them he was involved in, because you have to stop and think. These construction projects take years to finish. And then he goes to the next one. So he's fresh out of college, early 20s. When he's writing this article, he's later in life. He's probably, I don't remember, this has been many years since I read this. I think he was getting close to retirement age, and he started getting sick, and he went to the doctor and come to find out he had cancer. And not a good prognosis, not a long time. So he decided he was going to let out some of this stuff he'd come across during his career. And so he got a hold of a reporter, and he started talking over the phone. First mistake he made. They had several interviews, kind of like what we're doing. And they needed to sit down and, face-to-face and do a more extensive and really nail us down. So they agreed to meet at a town halfway in between, saving both time, and at a hotel, and they would discuss things then at length. Well, when the reporter showed up, the guy wouldn't answer his phone, wouldn't answer the door. Finally, enough time had gone on that he had the hotel open the door, and sure enough, the guy was dead inside. Best way I can describe his death was he was suicided. He had piano wire wrapped around his neck with the handles around behind him, pulled up over the headboard, and I've got a train going by, so if you hear any noise.
I can hear
Sorry
it.
about that.
That's all right.
So a special coroner was brought in, and very quickly, without even examining the body, signed off on the death certificate as suicide. So how you suicide yourself with piano wire and the handles end up behind you, I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, That's the end of the story.
Now, okay, well, I was going to ask real quick, what do you think, or maybe you were going to go into this, so forgive me if I'm kind of cutting you, heading you off at the pass here.
There.
No. It was totally fine. I just, I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, the handles were behind him. So, do you think he was done in by a human?
A very long story. I'm going to break it down into a nutshell because it took me several nights of reading his report on the computer screen, multiple pages of text, and
okay.
In his during his career, one of the first things he mentioned is being a demolitions expert. You do a lot of blasting for these underground facilities, but he also mentioned that they had, the military had beam technology that nobody on the planet knew about. If somebody else knew about it, it wasn't general knowledge to the public, I'll put it that way.
Of course.
I'm sure it's national defense, but this beam technology could burn through rock 3 times, I think it was almost 3 times faster than the fastest tunneling equipment that was commercially available at the time. So they were using it to build these facilities and then interconnect them through tunneling. If they were close enough to each other, they connected them by tunnels. And so he mentioned about the beam technology, which I now know to be a fact that we actually have because reporters in Afghanistan watched an American tank pull into a courtyard where a firefight was going on, and the bad guys, or who Americans were fighting, were hiding in a school bus. This tank shows up with no barrel on it, on the turret. It's got boxes hanging on the sides of it, and he pulled into the courtyard, turned the turret towards the bus. You don't really see much happening at first until you realize the bus is starting to ignite on the inside, fire-wise, and you see smoke start rolling out of it, and it gets red hot in the middle at about an 8-foot diameter, and it got so hot the frame sagged and hit the ground below it. The combatants inside the bus come flying out of it, and they were on fire, and the U.S. soldiers put them out of their misery, and it was witnessed by reporters from Sweden. And that's why you don't hear of things like that show up in the United States. It doesn't get talked about here because that's how we take care of our media, is we source stories like that. They never make it to the press. And so it did a roundabout way of coming to the public and ended up on Jeff Rentz's website. And so that kind of technology that he's referring to probably in the 70s, here it is being utilized in Afghanistan on a tank.
Right.
So they had that ability at the time. What really got to me though was his referring to aliens. One day he was doing they did a vertical shaft, dropped it way down, preliminary shaft, I guess, before they lined it, and they broke through. Sometimes you break through. I mean, they usually know where they're drilling. and they don't have to worry about water tables and things like that, or oil and stuff that can pop into your hole. So they were drilling down, and I don't know if they used the beam technology to do vertical shafts, but they stopped drilling and said they had a breakthrough. It broke into another tunnel. So they needed a visual inspection, and it was like several hundred feet down. So they had a winch specially set up with rope and everything and a man sling on it. And the typical guys that went down weren't available. So this engineer said, I'll go. So he strapped himself in, and he went down with his lights and radio. And he always carried a 38 on him when he went down, because he just always felt nervous down there. It's kind of scary. And, after you get so far down, it's dark. It's black. And shadows. And so he gets down there and he tells them to stop. He sees the breakthrough, and he's hearing voices, and has them lower him a little bit lower, and now he's looking at a human talking to an alien. And he described the alien as one of the Greys, and when he lowered down the next 10 feet or so he could see better, they spotted him. And the alien pulled out something that was on his belt that was kind of like a rod of sorts, and the guy interpreted it as some sort of a weapon because he's pointing it at him. He reacted by pulling his 38 out and started shooting at them. He hit the alien and missed the other guy because he took off running, and they both left. He couldn't see him anymore after he stopped shooting, and told the ground crew to get him out. And so he went out, and by the time, it took a long time to yard him back out. By the time he got to the surface, everybody had been given an evacuation order, and everybody was packing up and leaving. And he couldn't figure that out either, and by the time he got up there, it took him 15 minutes to get him to the surface. He was that far down. And maybe it was more than several hundred feet. But by the time they got him up and he's on the ground, there was only one guy he could talk to and ask what was going on, and he goes, we got to leave. Everybody was given an order to leave immediately. So we're all out of here, and he didn't get a chance to tell anybody what had happened. So whoever informed him from underground. And, here he was, one of his field trips down into Florida. He's taken to an underground base there, and he's going down these long corridors. And down one corridor, he looks down, and he sees humans in a cage. And they're real scruffy, and he's not real close to them. He's probably several hundred feet away, and their clothes are almost tattered and dirty, and disheveled looking. And he's noticing that the males on one side, females on another, and they're making sounds to him, but they're not using language. They don't even know how to speak. From what he understood, and they wouldn't talk to him about it because he asked his guide, what the hell was that? And he goes, nothing, none of your concern, don't worry about it, and from what he pieced together, he feels it was a breeding program that the aliens were doing. From what I've read, from way back when I first got into this, that's a common theme that doesn't go away, is a breeding program on this planet of some sort for some purpose. I've read all kinds of theories and guesses, hypotheses and stuff. One is to hybridize the humans. Another one was there was something wrong with the aliens and their DNA, which was a human DNA crossed with another alien DNA. And they were trying to fix something about it. They could no longer reproduce, and there too many. It was like 100% miscarriage when they were trying to reproduce. That's another story. One of them was, another theory is that, you heard me say this before, Earth is like a Jurassic Park.
Right.
All 5 races here were brought here, and apparently that's not normal. With the other aliens scattered throughout the galaxies, there are human races with them, most of them don't like humans. We don't cohabitate well with the other aliens. When we're on planets that are like 10 times bigger than our planet, humans are kind of alienated over an area, kind of like what we did with Indians. Put them on a reservation and keep them out of the way. It's, bizarre. What they were, the ultimate end goal of Earth, from what I understand, and this is still just theory, was that a hybridized race was to come out of this planet, a mixture of all 5 races. A 5'5", brown-skinned, almond-eyed, black-haired. It's all the races mixed. The red, white, all of them, red, yellow, black. And at that point, we would have already crossed the evolutionary bridge of telepathy and mental communication. We'd be into that by then. We'd be able to communicate with other aliens on their planets and probably doing trade, of some sort, business with them or of some sort. But that's kind of, and I have a hunch, I kind of lean that way more than all the other things I've heard. That's kind of, and I got that over many years from different sources of why I lean that way. So through his career as an engineer with the government, his closest encounter was seeing the actual alien, and then seeing the humans in cages that couldn't speak English, just grunting noises, and were waving at him, basically asking for help.
Yeah, that right there is just a disturbing image to even imagine to ever train your eyes on.
And then the story never got to be finished. It got to a certain point, and then it stopped, and then the reporter took over, and he goes, and he explained, why the story isn't going to be finished.
Right.
I mean,
well, speaking...
Bob Lazar,
yeah, go ahead. I was going to let you finish what you were saying.
Well, Bob Lazar, Area 51 engineer, they brought him in, another whiz kid. They grabbed him right out of school and brought him in, fast-tracked him up into the top secret stuff, and he finds himself being flown into Area 51 every day at his commute, and he's working with engineers that have in their possession UFOs that have been captured. They knock them out of the sky with a dummy missile that has no charge to it, explosives. And they had one working UFO. They had one that looked like a telephone pole had went through it, and that was the missile punching a hole through it. They had 2 others in parts and broken up debris. And the one working UFO they were to the point that they were starting to fly it, hover it, bring it out of and he's back inside of a facility that's built in the side of a mountain. And he's trying to he's told to back engineer the propulsion system. And the information they provide him with, your scientific elements on this planet they may go higher now. I think they stopped around 107, 109. I never took science, so I don't have this nailed down. But he was showing elements that were beyond that. He was using one called element 116, and that's what flew the craft. You put one of these little chips in there, and once you stepped inside the craft, the human aura was like the ignition key. It turned things on. It was ready to go.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, apparently the aliens had auras also, and they were craft was made for the grays. It appeared because they were short. It was short ceilings and things like that.
Now, real quick, I'm going to have us go ahead and go to a break, and when we come back, we can pick up where you kind of left off. But I definitely want you to also, when we come back, for the listeners' sake, because I'm sure I'm going to have a variety of different mixed listeners, maybe you can give a little bit of background on what a gray is. So
Sure.
We'll be right back with ASAP Radio. Okay, welcome back to ASEP Radio. My name is Ben Robison, and tonight's guest is my father, Jim Robison. We're going to kind of pick up where we left off in the middle segment there, and I think you were kind of giving us a rundown on Bob Lazar. So go ahead with that.
Okay. Yeah, he was involved in back engineering a propulsion system on a UFO that somehow the government had acquired. And he was feeling overwhelmed. He wanted to talk to somebody about it after work,
Right.
and so he chose a fellow worker, which was unfortunate because, unbeknownst to him, clear back in when was this? Mid-'80s, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, NSA was running their phone taps back then because he called a fellow worker and tried talking to him about it. He didn't want to talk about it. He knew better and basically got off the phone as quick as he could.
Right.
The next day, he gets pulled into an interrogation room with a drill sergeant, 45 on his hip, being very intimidating wording and gestures, and he didn't say if you talk about this with anybody, you're going to disappear, but he was implying that sort of thing.
Right.
So that ticked him off. That's one thing about humans is once we get pissed off, things can happen that we don't even realize we're capable of.
Right.
And so he started making notes, and within a very short period of time, less than a month, he basically left his job. But he also knew he couldn't just quit, so him and the wife packed up and left town, he goes home on a Friday, doesn't show up for work on Monday, and he's gone.
Oh, wow.
And went public with what he'd been doing there, kind of like our whistleblower here recently. He had several attempts on his life. One of them was in traffic. That's their favorite way of getting rid of witnesses or nosy reporters or somebody they need to silence. Traffic accidents are a great one.
How do they do that normally, though?
Well, you know what's really scary? In the old days, they just brought a big old limousine, up behind you and then caught you at a certain place where there weren't too many witnesses around and pushed you right off the road into a tree or off a cliff or whatever's convenient and hope that takes you out.
Right.
And they tried that. They forced him off the road once, and it didn't work. They tried burning him up in his condo. He had only one door that he could get out. The other one was blocked somehow, and I can't remember. I think it was on purposely blocked. I can't remember the details.
Jesus.
It was quite a few years ago. And so they set fire to his house. They poured gasoline on the front porch, basically, and on the back porch, and lit him up.
Oh, my God.
And he ended up going out through a second-story window off the roof onto the ground, ran for his car, and got out of there and left town. Didn't go back. By then, his wife was gone, and it was just him. And he went on the run for a while, and they kind of left him alone. But was there any more attempts? That's the only two that come to mind. There may have been others. He basically had to go on the lam because he turned loose a videotape. And the videotape was very descriptive. I watched it. It was a copy of an old VCR tape, and it was real grainy and stuff, but it was still clear enough to see who he was and stuff. How they tried to make his history of him go away so he'd be a non-human. They actually made his records at work disappear, and a reporter that was looking into it found an old phone book, and his name was in the phone book. And here they were saying, oh, no, he never really worked for us. No, we don't know who he is. And produced, no record when you went to HR. Nobody could be pulled up because he's
Right.
been purged. They got rid of college records. I think they went into junior high and grade school and purged those too, if I remember right. I mean, it was quite extensive what was going on to discredit him. And to this day, he's on the lam. I mean, you won't hear of him. He's gotten the word, you might say.
He now knows to kind of stay off the radar per se. Last question I kind of wanted to roll into. I definitely want to touch on this because I think it's a dynamic that I've found always, I guess, most intriguing, because you stop and think often, okay, we're talking about, aliens, and we're talking about UFO sightings, and we're talking about these abductions and all these things. Those are interactions that are going on with us. But, the number one thought that goes through my mind is, what is their intention, to interact with us? So I'm curious, what is your thoughts on the intention of alien, outside of this human race, outside of planet Earth, natively, why are they interacting with us?
Well, several reasons and theories mixed together. And since there's no way to prove it, any of this really exists, we'll go with theories. One of them is they're checking on our planet for resource value. And there's a theory out there that suggests that ancient aliens used humans to mine gold. They needed gold for something, and they were basically had enslaving large chunks of populations to do their bidding. From what I understand, there's quite a few different races of aliens around. The Greys are just one of many. They are they're a little different than the rest, from what I understand. They have a hive mentality. Remember in Star Trek, was it the Borg? Was that they used a collective mental type of thinking where they couldn't make conscious choices on their own? It had to be up the ladder and then back down, and everybody involved voted on it, basically. And this is kind of how I've heard it explained about the Greys. They're kind of like our caretakers, from another way of looking at it, from what I've read. They watch over us. They're like scientists watching over lab rats, and they kind of see us that way. Quite a few of the aliens races look down on us. They don't see us as an equal, because we're not really equals. Our technology is still, we've got space exploration to the moon accomplished. We've sent satellites further, and, we've got satellites onto Mars and stuff. So we're slowly branching out, but we're nowhere near interstellar travel. So from what I've gathered, what their intention isn't always positive. In fact, over the years, and for great periods of times, and I don't really tell this to most people, I haven't even mentioned it to Ben, that I haven't really mentioned it to probably anybody, that I had to back out of the subject. I had read enough stuff that it was keeping me awake at nights. For example, that engineer that saw locked up humans in a cage that couldn't even speak, that had lived their whole lives out until their worth is no more, their DNA value is all they're after, and once they can't reproduce the way they want, their history. You start reading stories like that, and then, I read another one, The Intelligent Design, an e-book I got off of Jeff Rense's website. And yes, here it explains why we're on our planet, our creators, our God. And God was a simplistic form of thinking back in the early days of raising a human race. Humans created us, and that's how it's always been done, is humans create humans. Aliens don't do it. Humans do it. But we seem to be involved in some big mass experiment where we have other races involved watching us to see how we evolve, to see if we pull through. I mean, if we end up nuking this planet, I mean, hell, Fukushima may do it in for us anyway. But I mean, if we, if World War III starts and we start launching missiles, the planet's pretty much toast. That's a planet killer. Until we get the technology that can neutralize radiation, which our aliens used clear back in the early days of Sodom and Gomorrah, when they nuked the city, and they told the people who left, when they told everybody to leave, don't look back. Well, you don't look at a nuclear flash. It'll burn your eyeballs and put you into shock and can, do you in just from the wound of an eye injury of that extent. When the rains came and Noah built the ark, well, the explanation that they give in the intelligent design is that the humans came back, the engineers that created the humans on this planet came back with a large mothership and gathered up all the DNA they needed of plants, animals, reptiles, insects, whatever, humans. They had that, and they saved it all, 2 by 2. Well, that was how it was interpreted back then. But what was really done was that. Well, so we've got human aliens, we've got grays, we've got giants in the 8 to 9 foot range that look like a human, the Nordic types. There's oh my goodness, probably a dozen more that come to mind. And then I read a book about a Tibetan monk many years ago, right after the turn of the century, when cars were coming out and all that. Lobsang Rampa, and Tuesday is part of his name, the day he was born on. So it's Lobsang Tuesday Rampa or something like that. This was back in the 70s, very big series, and the most fascinating one of the series of books that he wrote, and it's a real person, was about the hermit. It was an individual. He was. This is like the Kung Fu series come to life, where the young disciple has been turned loose from the monastery to go out on the world with it and give the world his message. Well, he'd been given information to give to the hermit. And the hermit, the story about him, everybody should read this, because in a nutshell, the Chinese invaded Tibet. He was captured and tortured. They burned his eyes out with hot rods and threw him in a dumpster, basically a trash heap, because they thought he was dead. He wandered out of the city. He was eating and drinking, eating leaves and grasses and drinking out of mud puddles until somebody found him and dressed his wounds and stuff and helped him heal and nourish and all that. And he was ended up putting in Tibet, it's a high honor if you're a monk to become a hermit. A hermit is walled into a cave, and you live the rest of your days out in this cave being brought food morning and night, and you meditate the rest of your days until you pass away. Well, he was designated to be a hermit. It's a voluntary thing. It's a high honor. And so he wanted to do that, so they brought him up there. They didn't need to wall him in. He was already blind. He couldn't wander away. He was next to a lake, so they kept his cave close to the lake that he was by. And so this hermit was waiting for Lobsang to come along. And so finally he did. He's like 13, 14, somewhere in there. And Lobsang has a whole lot of stuff to download on this guy, and so they finally meet. He finds the guy he's been chosen to give this information to. He spends several days with him, and at the end of it, when he's done telling him the whole story, the hermit says, "Okay, that's exactly what I needed." And after he travels on, Lobsang travels on, the hermit stays there for a while. He becomes an abducted individual. He's taken aboard a craft. They hook him up to a device, which is basically, as he described it, a monitor that was attached to his optic nerves to allow him to see through a camera. And he's on a gurney, and he described the nausea, the sickness of going through of this thing, moving around, going down corridors. He's inside a spaceship, and he describes motion sickness by trying to look through this camera, and it's basically, he's not moving, but it's moving, and the whole gurney's moving, and he's having issues with that. And finally he gets used to it, and the nausea goes away. The doctor and him become buddies. It's like Bones off of Star Trek, and him and this guy, this monk, and so they're friends. And he's on board for first he was out of it. They kept him in unconscious for a week or two while they healed him, and now they were trying to figure out what to do with him. And what he overheard, there was a meeting going on one night in the big council meeting room, and the meeting was whether to scrap the humans on the planet Earth or not. And when I mean scrap, I mean everybody gone. Yeah. And so the council is a galactic council of representatives from other planets, of other races of aliens. And so the doctor is, he knows of the meeting. It's a mandatory, everybody's supposed to be there. Well, the doctor doesn't like leaving his patient, so he wheels the patient along with him. The patient can hear what's being said. He freaks out when the camera accidentally is shown to the audience, or maybe he asked the doctor to turn the gurney so he could see. I can't remember now. But he sees the audience of about 12 aliens. And, I mean, we're talking, they range from reptilian type to, use your imagination. It's kind of like Star Wars when, what's his name? He goes into the bar where all the aliens are. I can't think of. Yes, thank you. When he went into that bar, it's a variety of aliens is what he's looking at, is this council. And they're all agitated. They're all pissed off. They want to scrap this planet. They're tired of the problems and stuff. See, apparently we're some sort of a protected planet. Otherwise, if we weren't protected, this planet would have been raped for its resources many, many years ago. But they still come in and go. They can do research here. I'm sure that they abduct and take people. I mean, all the kids on milk cartons aren't all to pedophiles and serial killers. There's a small percentage of them that left this planet or are being held hostage on the planet one way or the other.
Right.
So listening to this argument, go ahead.
Well, real quick, we're kind of ending the tail end of the show. So if you were to, I guess, just sum up as best as you could in a sentence or two of, because you've given us some really good examples of their intentions, some good story behind that, and I think that's great. But if you had to provide us, maybe a couple sentences worth of their intention interacting with us, what would you say it was?
Well, from what I've gathered, this is just my humble opinion, they see us more of in a clinical way. We're just we're like cattle to them. They're to tend the herd, keep us somewhat healthy, and try not and let us kill ourselves probably but we still have freedom of choice. I mean, we can still do that, but it's kind of like a teeter-totter over periods of time. The way the country's going right now and the way the world is shaping up, not looking good at all. And I hate to be, throw a negative light on things. And like I said, this is my opinion. There's probably going to have to be some sort of purging in the future. And there again, that's not good news. And these are the things that why I actually started backing off from the subject. I mean, the deeper I got into it, the more negative stuff I was coming across that was substantial. I mean, when you start talking about, the getting rid of a whole race and starting over,
Yeah, it's pretty heavy material to even try to absorb and even just accept, if you're willing to even accept it. And I am sure there's a lot of people out there listening and not, that are probably not willing to even accept some of that, that you've even thrown out there. But regardless, as you said, that's your humble opinion. But last bit I wanted to do real quick is kind of my own favorite little piece of the end of this whole podcast is I like to do a little bit of talking shit. Basically, with your topic in your podcast tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit of shit about in like a 5-minute segment here, maybe talk about, what are the pros and the cons to Hollywood, and what they've introduced us and kind of tried to throw at us on the concept of alien inhabitation or abduction.
Wow, excellent question. Well, let me go back in time. Let's go back to War of the Worlds, Orson Welles. Orson Welles was contacted. He did a radio show, and he had friends, and these friends had friends, and there was an experiment that our government wanted to do to see what kind of reaction our population would have if, in the event, we were under attack from aliens. So they gave him a script and said, if you can put this script together, follow these points, put it together, and basically follow this idea, we will pay you for that. Well,
right. Back
in when this happened in the 50s, Orson Welles would have done something like that for say $1,200, $1,500, and him and these guys would have banged it out, in a couple of days and rehearsed it and then done it on a live radio show, and then carried on. I mean, they went beyond the measure, they went above and beyond the Call of Duty, you might say, to pull this off, got into it, they really liked the idea. But there was also a carrot involved on the stick. They offered him like $3,000 to do this little radio show. And he goes, what they didn't know, we would have done it for $1,000. And so they gave him this chunk of money, and so everybody's really thrilled with this. They just made a big nest egg, a nice little chunk of change. So they really did the show so well that they actually had people commit suicide, jump out windows, because they did it so well. Well,
put people in a panic.
Yeah. And stop and think about it. If a saucer lands on the White House lawns and our TVs all of a sudden go to an emergency news break live on Washington D.C. Here's aliens, and an alien walks out and take me to your leader, that sort of thing.
Right.
The world stops. The world will stop.
Absolutely.
All work, all traffic, and anybody that has any contact with news, I mean, it's just within 24 hours, the world will have shut down. Well, you can't have that sort of thing, that's economic collapse right there. And so, over the years, one of the things that I've learned or discovered is clear back in Star Wars time, very first one, and we're talking E.T. and Star Wars and all these, and Star Trek. All these series were brought about, were encouraged through governments that had been given a plot, an idea. Let me back up. You want to become a film producer. You want to, get your name out there. And one of the easy ways to do it was to take seed money for your project. That was the hardest thing to get a movie going, was getting your money.
Right. Funding.
Yeah. Financing. Investments is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, the government put together different groups, foundations, and they would have branches of them that would fund money to startups, and they would let it be known if you were a startup like a Spielberg just out of college, and you're looking to make your first movie and you need money, you could take this federal money, but you had to follow their script, their criteria of what they wanted you to do. So you could take the 100,000 or a couple of 100,000, whatever it was back then, and you had to follow their script.
Right.
The script almost always about aliens and humans interacting of some sort. They gave you an idea and said, you come up with the rest of it, but this is what you need to follow. This is what we need to see inside that for you to get this money.
Right. Now, but what do you think, though? Do you think, what are the pros and cons to both of this? So we're getting inundated nowadays. We're in 2013 here, and we're getting inundated with this alien and UFO type subjects. What are the pros and cons to it?
Well, here, let me interrupt you for a second. What you're referring to is what's commonly referred to as the alien presence. The alien presence on this planet now goes from children up to seniors. It's now integrated from Saturday cartoons to some of our biggest blockbuster movies.
Exactly.
That's how education is done through Hollywood, and that's how you get the message out. Because sooner or later, this planet has to learn how to communicate and cohabitate with aliens.
So are you saying then?
It's by mass education. The best way to do mass education is television and movies.
Okay, so what you're saying then is it's all a pro. There's no cons to it. They're what they're trying to do is they're trying to desensitize us on the subject. We don't want to be subjects like we were back when Orson Welles did his hoax and people started killing themselves. What we want to do is we want to pretty much just desensitize people into realizing, or at least the mass of humans, to say, I'm good with this. I can accept it, or at least I'm not going to go to the precipice on my, in my mental faculties and commit suicide over the concept of alien.
And look how many generations it's taken to do that. From, we'll just go in our own time period, say back in the 70s, early 70s. That's when the really big alien movies started coming out. And I love to ask this question. You probably know the answer now because I've asked you this several times. Who's the most famous alien on this planet?
E.T.
Wrong.
I thought you've asked me this several times. Who is the most famous alien?
And you've already forgotten. It's Superman.
Oh, that's right. You're absolutely right. What am I thinking?
And not the most famous alien in America. He's the most famous alien on the planet. And there again, that's another example of the alien presence. I mean, you watch Saturday cartoons, the children are being influenced right there with aliens and kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Theaters to books, and I mean, look how far when a big movie comes out like Star Trek and Star Wars, and they sell all the lunchbox. Kids take their lunchbox to school, with Darth Vader on the side of it.
Do me a favor here. Do me a favor here. Ask me that same question again.
Okay. Who's the most famous alien on the planet?
Oh, come on, Dad. It's Superman. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, Dad, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your night. I want you to tell Mom thank you very much. Give her a kiss. Tell her I love her. And, it's been always fascinating talking to you on this subject. And this won't be the end of this. I would love to revisit this and maybe cover some other subjects, more specific ones, that we can, further talk about this subject and include you in on. Not only that, for people who are listening and are not familiar, I run autonomous studies of the enigmatic and paranormal, which is what is called ASEP, which also in turn is ASEP Radio. My father consults for me, and I plan to work with him in the future on some projects, that delve into this side of the paranormal, which is ufology. So at any rate, it's been a pleasure to have you on here, and I just wanted to thank you. Is there any way, if people wanted to get in touch with you, that you would have them reach out and, get in touch with you?
Sure. I mean, I have an email. They can get a hold of me through arjrontheroad@yahoo.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last thing I was going to do is I was going to give a shout out to Mike Smith over at InfoSub. He'll be putting ASIP Radio's podcast up on the InfoSub's website, which you can find at infosub.listen2myradio.com. So that's infosub listen2myradio.com. At any rate, thank you for tuning in, and look forward to having you guys back and listening to the next podcast I have. Have a good evening, and this is ASEP Radio.